Hi everyone, welcome back to part 2 of the Starboard IT Trade and IT Special Series. So with part 1, we talked about, as an importer and exporter, all the importance of having a proper IT strategy and what the real essentials are you need to know to make sure that you're safe, secure and growing your business from an IT perspective. Today's episode is all around making sure that how you can properly have a remote working strategy. So as we've all experienced through COVID over the last 6 months or so, remote working has now become a bit of a new norm, but most companies were unprepared and unorganised. So today's part 2 is all about how we can actually kick off with the remote working strategy. So joining me again, we've got Steve Kelly in studio, Ricky Zappia up in Sydney on Zoom. So thanks guys for joining me for part 2. Cheers. Ricky, I want to kick off with you, mate. So as I've just mentioned in the intro, COVID-19 has just disrupted everything and everyone right across the globe. Companies are being thrown into chaos and people can't go into work or to the office. So they've had to scramble and try and put in place a remote working capability. How most companies didn't even have a strategy like this, unless it was like a Google sort of fun type of model. Most businesses, especially in Australia, were so unprepared. How have Starboard, I know you guys have been at the forefront, you're actually way ahead of the curve from a remote working strategy policy for companies. How have you gone about it and what's the influx been for you?
So, Lawrence, good question there. Thank you for the introduction as well. Look, we've gone about it by a way in which we understand what systems our staff require to use on any given day and making sure that those systems are available for whenever they need them, basically. And these systems are efficient. They can run over the internet, whether their staff are at a cafe, if they're on their phones, if they're on their laptops, if they're on their desktops at home. There's a way for them to connect to the infrastructure and do their job. So pretty much making it as seamless as possible for users to use the equipment and use the setup that we have in the office, but at home. Yeah. We've even gone to the extent of downsizing the office space and also being able to use some of that equipment in staff homes as well. So rather than having to go out and buy a whole bunch of new equipment, we've been able to repurpose some of that equipment at home.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. Steve, I want to ask you. So, typically when you're working off-site or out of the office, you think about things like tradies, carpenters or sparkies, they've got their tools of the trade. You've got your basics that you need to be able to do something off-site. I'm guessing it's the same for remote working. You need to know what toolkit, what equipment, what hardware, what you need to be able to succeed in a remote working environment.
Well, luckily these days that's fairly straightforward. I think having mobile phones or laptops or desktops is the key. You need an endpoint to connect into whatever you're going to use. But I think we mentioned in the last episode about conducting a business impact assessment, understanding what your critical applications are. And as you said in the introduction, COVID has actually highlighted the importance of technology and how you deploy it correctly. It's the difference between people carrying on their business and not. So it was a big wake-up call for a lot of people. So I think understanding the fundamentals of what makes your business up,
yep.
Be it email, file storage, or all critical apps that you use is really fundamental to that.
Yeah, the connectivity issues have been a major one that I've noticed even when doing Zoom meetings and stuff, is that if you're trying to have a seamless connectivity with home internet, broadband, especially if you've got kids at home trying to do their remote learning, school stuff going on, it's something that no one's actually been thought of. Well, I hadn't thought of before about that bandwidth capacity. So that assessment criteria, now you can see the importance of that so much more.
Yeah. So I think I was very fortunate on a personal level. I went from ADSL broadband to the new NBN halfway through the COVID. I saw immediately the difference in the quality of Zoom or video conference meetings straight away. Yeah. Having that consistent, high quality connection. And if it failed, then I could actually then tether off my mobile phone. So I could actually had my own almost BCP within my own house.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, I noticed that as well. Even things like the data models that, so if you've got a workforce that's deployed and you've got company phones for them and things like that, then you might need to up their mobile plan so they've got better data, bandwidth and all that sort of stuff. So
yeah, a lot of the providers these days, and we're getting a little bit off sidetracked here, but a lot of the providers let you pool the data. So if one person's a big user of it, then that combined, and one person's not such a big consumer of the data, then that averages across the pool. Yeah.
Well, that's the reason I bring that up, Steve, is like, as a business owner, I'm guessing that one of your remote working assessments will say, okay, how much data do you guys need to use as a group, as an organisation? So therefore, you can make those type of assessments and recommendations.
For sure, yeah, it's very easy within the office. It gets a little bit more complicated once you start going out to people's homes. People's homes could be in places where they don't have the best of connectivity, be it mobile or NBN or the old style broadband as well.
So, very true. Ricky, I want to ask you, mate, if I can. So, we just touched on this very lightly there about the video conferencing and how, even now as we're doing it now from Sydney with yourself, but it's just a normal way of life now that we're doing Zoom meetings or Skype meetings or Teams meetings, and all that stuff is great from a technology perspective, but it also has a bit of a risk to that as well. I mean, people, it's a whole new access point into organisations from a security level. IP, intellectual property, all those type of things. So, how do you put in place? I know that Starboard, as I said at the outset, have really been leaders in this space for a number of years now, not just because of COVID, but how do you put in place the right sort of policies and procedures to manage this from a remote working perspective?
Good question, Lawrence. So I think, look, with support as a service these days, so applications such as Zoom and where you're actually not having to install anything on your computer except for a client, these providers have taken a lot of the guesswork out of security for your data once it hits their network, right? But what you can control is what's in your network and what's on your workstation. So things like implementing some security policies that prevent the sharing of data so that you can't share any sensitive data over those connections is likely a good idea. Things like using strong encryption on your connection, things like patching your laptop and using strong passwords is always, something that we suggest doing. But most importantly, keep your application up to date. So if you're using some software that's not your own and it's provided by a provider, you need to keep it up to date so to the latest version, because every week or every 2 weeks I'm seeing Zoom updates come through, right? And they're fixing gaps, fixing bugs, and they're looking at the trends that are happening and looking at the holes that might be there and plugging them as they come up. So if you're not installing those latest updates, then you're at risk and you're vulnerable. Things like utilizing wait rooms and utilizing password protected meetings is also of value to make sure that only the people that you actually want and have invited to your video call can get access to the call, right? So that's giving you the control back. If you just have a model where anyone who has the link can join the room and there's no level of administration there. Potentially, if you're in a large organization and have 500 people joining a call, what's to stop 1 or 2 people getting in that you didn't want? You're not going to know about it, right?
Yeah.
Things like blurring your background and mainly having video calls in a place that is suited to have video calls is probably another important thing, right? I wouldn't be going down to my local Starbucks and putting my video on and having a call about the finances of the company, for instance. Choose your time and your place and do it in an environment that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to add to it?
Yeah, we added sent a document out to all our staff with some just simple guidelines that they could follow, because a lot of people, they've been thrust into a new working style, right? And they want to know what's expected of them and how to address certain situations, and they just can't really walk up to your desk and ask you anymore. So we provided a little guideline on what to do or what to expect in certain situations, and it's just really a common sense approach that we're trying to get across to our staff, and we can do that not only to our staff, but we can also provide the same service to our customers as well.
I really love what you both talked about with me early in the piece with COVID, when we had that remote working special as well. But when you touched on the things like the cultural and the staff engagement and how that sort of, the checklist, if you like, and I know, Ricky, you just touched on the blurring of the backgrounds, the appropriateness, but also about the importance of having the proper breaks and remote working essentials. about, from a cultural point of view, how you can still stay engaged with the company, how you can support each other as staff and team members and managers. So, I was so impressed with your approach to the whole remote working. It wasn't just IT. It was about giving your lessons learned across all those different sectors that you guys play in finance, you play in so many other different sectors, not just international trade space that we know you for, but you've really brought a whole range of insight and expertise over and above just an IT. So that's really beneficial, and I love that assessment. One of the things I want to ask you again, Ricky, just on this, and I'm going a little bit off topic here, but I think it's relatable, is that one of our early sessions back in the old days when we could do live events, we talked about things like other breach points or access points that companies or individuals don't typically think of. Things like your Google Play devices or Alexa devices in the home, where remote working, you might be connected to a network, which is then connected to your business network. These type of devices, all unbeknown to us, could actually also create weaknesses in a security perspective. And the reason why I want to bring that up is, with every crisis, people, unscrupulous people will take advantage of that. So we have seen a spike in cybersecurity threats. The government's just launched a massive campaign on cybersecurity, and remote working is probably the weakest point, I'm guessing, and you guys would know better than me, for any organisation now. Is that right, Ricky?
Yeah, there's many things you can do there, Lawrence, in terms of preventing, unwanted devices accessing your personal network and accessing the information on your PC. So we use Microsoft and Microsoft products, and Microsoft is constantly releasing new features on their Office 365 and their SharePoint environments to help increase the security and also help detect any threats. So they have threat protection, which is basically a firewall on your machine that can look at anything that's intrusive and trying to access your network or your machine that you don't know about. So it's actually becoming pretty smart, and rather than having to go out and buy another piece of software to look at it, Microsoft's going down the road of an all-in-one type solution and to be the provider, basically the IT in a box, and they can do it all.
Yeah, but what you've just mentioned there, Ricky, I know this might have been on part one, so forgive me if it is. But the whole thing about making sure that most companies and most individuals, myself included, you'll get a system or a package and you think, you know what, yeah, I'll use the basics, and you're probably using less than 20% of its capabilities. So this is where you guys can actually say, look, you've already got these systems, you've already got these software packages, you've already got teams. Let us show you how to actually get the most out of those existing systems and packages.
Yeah, that's one of the things we've done for many of our customers is go through and do an assessment of what applications they've got in their environment. And in many cases, you find application duplication right through a whole bunch of different types of things, from email right through to file storage, right through to all sorts of things. Yeah. And it's a product of cloud, unfortunately, where you can actually sign up to a cloud provider with a credit card at very cheap prices. And it's a term called shadow IT. So people think that some other system is better for their needs. They bring that into the environment. Yeah. But you can control that through a number of means, by locking down laptops, but also through education as well.
Yeah, I think the education part is so powerful. And again, one of the events that we did last year was around how companies can put in place the proper policies, procedures, and how most data breaches, I was blown away when you told me, Steve, at that event, was that most breaches actually come from internal.
Yeah, because either they become disgruntled with the company and therefore go looking for things to do, or sometimes it's just inadvertent because of an email that's come through and they've clicked on an email and compromised the system. Yeah,
and this is why this whole topic of today's series is the part two here, is that remote working, you don't have the luxury of just checking with someone, oh, does this look dodgy to you? Or, you really need to have that education, policies, structures in place, and that ability to preempt possibilities versus react to the proverbial hit in the fan is.
Yeah, and as ISO 27001 is part of that compliance is ongoing, is that you need to educate the people in the organisation.
Yeah.
And we do that through a range of ways. One of them is emails every month on a different topic. Did you know, if you do this, what do you do if this happens? It provides people with that constant reinforcement of what to do in certain situations or what not to do in certain situations as well.
Yeah, and that's going to change. I think everyone around the world now accepts the fact that there will be some component of remote working, even when we get back to a COVID normal, whatever they call it, is that we might be in office 3 to 4 days a week, but I don't think we'll ever go back to a place where there's no remote working anymore.
Simple costs as well as driving that, because the executives now are seeing that rental inside a CBD is very expensive, and they can reduce that footprint and save lots and lots of money by putting their trusted people out in their own homes.
Yeah, very true. I wanted to ask about the next point, Steve, is around the automation part and how, again, when you sort of take it for granted, when you're in an office space, you can do things manually, and you can speak to someone or a colleague who might be in accounts, or someone in sales, or someone in the warehouse for inventory. So, you can literally walk into someone's office and have a chat. And there might be inbox trays and outbox trays, the stuff that you typically find around any office. But now with remote working, there has a great opportunity for companies to revisit their whole infrastructure and work out what can be automated, what can't. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, look, I think the first place, and you sort of almost touched on it, is the paperless office, in tray. So that term has been around the industry for at least 2 decades.
Yeah.
And I think by now a lot of people expect it to be paperless. I think this is actually this offers an opportunity. One of our customers has just gone through a major project where all their mail that was coming in, they've digitized that. So one person digitizes that and then sends it out via email.
Right.
Very simple solution, but it's effective, right? So how do people get their mail when they're at home?
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
So it starts people thinking what can be done and how you can automate it. And that's a very simple example of what can be automated in.
Yeah, absolutely. I know from supply chain, logistics, distribution type days, is that you will have consignment notes going into a tray. You'll have delivery dockets going into another tray. Then you'll have invoices from suppliers, courier companies, transport, shipping line. So you have this literally a corridor of trays, which for every aspect of your supply chain milestone. And so many companies still do it that way. But as you say, remote working means that doesn't work anymore.
No, it needs to be digitized. And once it's digitized and people start to see the efficiencies, then that gets its own momentum and through your organisation, and that will then spill into other organisations as well.
Yeah, I love it. It's a really powerful thing that none of us, well, I'm generalising, but most people in import and export in this whole space, it's almost been, even the big companies haven't really taken advantage of the technology as much as they should, because just like every organisation, you get bogged down with your core functions, and the improvement, the high level macro assessment doesn't really take place effectively or consistently enough.
Yeah, it's also important to note that any automation you need to have a big understanding of what the manual process to start with. So you can actually identify where things are breaking down in the digital space as well.
Yeah.
So they will go wrong at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Look, I love it. Like the second part of this series has been really beneficial just for me to learn, but I'm sure all of our viewers out there, who have been thrown into the deep dark world of remote working, I can relate to a lot of the stuff that the three of us have just discussed. So one of the things that, again, I'll really suggest and recommend to all the viewers is that you've heard already that Starboard are much more than your average IT provider. They'll provide the infrastructure, the assessments, and really help you navigate the best way to put in place the proper policies, procedures for remote working, but also where you want that to go to and how you can use it as a leveraging tool to make business more efficient, safer, secure, and more profitable at the end of the day. So really the investment you make in the right capabilities, that you've got freedom and whole range of other flexible options for you and your customers. So I really recommend, we'll have all the links here for the part 2 episode for remote working. Check out Starboard IT. They are amazing professionals in this space. So thanks again for joining us for part 2. Coming up in part 3, we're going to talk about project management, tender management, and how IT on a global scale can still be managed on a remote level as well and a local level. So stay tuned. We'll see you very soon in part 3. Cheers.